In my last video, covering the ground effect era from 1978 to 1982, I briefly touched upon a succession of boycotted races and attempts to flout the rules to keep a competitive edge that happened around this time. This has since become known as the FISA-FOCA war, which saw a rift between teams taking sides regarding things such as enforcement of the rules and regulations, organisation of races, allocation of prize money, and commercial rights. It's something that many F1 fans will have forgotten, and many others may never have heard of, but it ultimately completely transformed the political, organisational and commercial structure of the sport. So what was the FISA-FOCA war? When the FIA first formed in France in 1904 as the International Association of Recognised Automobile Clubs, or IARAC for short, its principal aim was to represent the interests of automobile clubs and car users, which at the time was still very rare. Motor racing was very much in its infancy, but in 1922 the IARAC created the International Sporting Commission, or CSI, which would act as the governing body for Grand Prix motor racing. This first began with the creation of the European Drivers' Championship in 1931. In 1946 the IARAC became the International Automobile Federation, or FIA, and created a standardised set of rules for Grand Prix motor racing, and with this Formula One was born. The CSI represented the FIA and was in charge of creating the rules and regulations and organising the race calendar, whereas the hosts of each race, for example the British Racing Drivers Club at Silverstone, were in charge of allotting prize money and the general day-to-day running of the event. In 1950, the first FIA World Championship of Drivers was held, being joined by the International Cup for F1 manufacturers in 1958. 3 years later, the Grand Prix Drivers Association was formed, or GPDA, which acted as a trade union that would give the drivers representation during discussions with the CSI to improve safety standards, following numerous fatal accidents in the preceding 11 years. In 1972, the Brabham team was bought out by Bernie Ecclestone, and 2 years later he formed the Formula One Constructors Association, or FOCA, alongside Frank Williams, team principal of Frank Williams Racing Cars, Colin Chapman, team principal of Lotus, Teddy Meyer, team principal of McLaren, Ken Tyrrell, team principal of Tyrrell, and Max Mosley, co-founder and legal and commercial representative for March Engineering. Their intention was to represent the interests of the smaller, privately owned teams commercially, at first against the race organisers, but later against the large manufacturer teams such as Ferrari, Matra and Alfa Romeo. In 1978, Ecclestone made himself chief executive of FOCA, with Mosley acting as his legal representative. At the same time, the CSI was dissolved and replaced with the International Motorsport Federation, or FISA, with Jean-Marie Balestre becoming its president. The first tensions arose at the Swedish Grand Prix, where Brabham, owned by Ecclestone, unveiled the BT46B fan car, designed to challenge the pioneering ground effect design of Colin Chapman's Lotus 79. Niki Lauda comfortably won the race, and despite its design being protested by the other teams under the guise of the fan being a movable aerodynamic device, FOCA declared it legal as technical director Gordon Murray claimed the fan's primary purpose was to cool the engine. Despite that, Brabham voluntarily withdrew the car, as the other FOCA-aligned teams threatened to withdraw their support, which Ecclestone needed for his own career ambitions. Murray attempted to build another fan car in 1979, but by now FOCA had intervened and outlawed fans as aerodynamic devices. After Ronnie Peterson's death at Monza in 1978, Ecclestone, in consultancy with the GPDA, brought in Sid Watkins as the official FIA head doctor, who would attend every race as part of the push for improved safety. In 1979, Ecclestone began pushing for better commercial rights for the FOCA-aligned teams, who felt that winnings and proceeds from races were given more generously to the FISA-aligned teams, and that the rules and regulations tended to favour them as well. The first major salvo came at the Spanish Grand Prix in 1980. The FOCA-aligned team's drivers all boycotted the driver briefings at the preceding Belgian and Monaco Grand Prix. FISA claimed these were compulsory, despite no rule officially being in place, and then fined them $2,000 each. When none of the drivers paid the fine, FISA then tried to have their super licenses revoked. As a response to this, the FOCA-aligned teams all threatened to boycott the race. The Royal Spanish Automobile Club, or RACE, who were organising the event, attempted to pay the fines themselves, which FISA rejected. King Juan Carlos eventually intervened, insisting the race go ahead, which forced the RAC to bypass the FISA-affiliated Spanish Motorsport Federation. This meant that as the race was no longer sanctioned by FISA, there was no need to possess a FISA super license, but as a result it was now also a non-championship race. As a consequence of this, Ferrari, Renault and Alfa Romeo all withdrew, as did Ozella, though their cars were loaned to their sponsors as a separate entry so they could still race. After the race, the FIA committee removed FOCA's seat from the FISA Executive Committee and also declared the race illegal and removed any championship points. Before the following round in France, all drivers paid their outstanding fines and had their FISA Super licenses returned to them. Alan Jones won the race, and despite expressing his indignance at not being awarded championship points for doing so, eventually went on to win the championship as well. In late 1980, FISA banned flexible side skirts on the cars, which had been crucial in their application of ground effect. Bernie Ecclestone, as a response, attempted to create a rival series called the World Federation of Motorsport and formed an 18-race calendar. He did not have the support of the FISA-aligned teams nor many of the race organisers, and it caused numerous disruptions to the official FISA-sanctioned calendar. The season was expected to open with the Argentine Grand Prix in January, which had to be cancelled, which would be followed by the South African Grand Prix, which was postponed from February to April. This was not received well by the hosts, as they had already done all of their marketing and promotion for the February date. April had less favourable weather conditions, and they had already signed a contract with FOCA to host the race in February. FISA delivered an ultimatum to their hosts to either host the race in April against their wishes, or keep it in February but now as a non-championship Formula Libre event. They chose the latter, so the FISA-aligned teams of Ferrari, Renault, Alfa Romeo, Azella and Toleman all sat out the event, leaving the 11 FOCA-aligned teams, all British except for the German ATS, all running the Cosworth DFV, and all running with flexible side skirts, which were now legal again. The lack of support from FISA, the poor fan attendance and limited coverage meant the breakaway series quickly fell apart. A few weeks earlier, after Goodyear had threatened to withdraw as Formula One's official tyre supplier, Ecclestone organised a meeting with the FIA, FISA and all team principals at the FIA headquarters at the Place de la Concorde in Paris, who all agreed to sign the first Concorde Agreement. It made attendance by all teams at all races compulsory, mostly because the television rights to Formula One had now been given to FOCA, so they needed to guarantee their audiences had a race to watch. In the first couple of decades of Formula One, very few races are broadcast live anywhere in the world. This began to increase in the 1970s, and with Ecclestone's influence the BBC got exclusive coverage rights in the UK, which was quickly followed by countries such as France, Germany, Brazil and the United States, each getting their own exclusive broadcaster. At the time, each host nation was in charge of producing the broadcast footage, with every other national broadcaster providing their own presenters and commentators, which created further tensions as the hosts often employed biased coverage towards home drivers and teams. FOCA also agreed to comply with the FISA skirt ban provided they continued to have financial and commercial control, and that FISA maintained a period of stability regarding the regulations over the next 4 years. In order to properly enforce the flexible skirt ban, FISA also mandated a minimum ride height of 6 cm for the cars. Brabham, however, quickly got around this and arrived at the United States Grand Prix West with Gordon Murray having fitted hydropneumatic suspension to the BT48C, which held the ride height at 6 cm when the car was stationary but would then drop under the pressure of the downforce when the car was on track and the ride height couldn't be measured. The other teams naturally were not happy about this, but it was permitted as Murray had found a loophole in the regulations where a degree of suspension compression was permitted, but exactly how much had never been specified. The other teams tried and failed to replicate this system, and eventually made a similar design where a simple switch would lower the ride height on track. Both the skirt ban and minimum ride height were reversed in 1982, but the next battleground turned towards engines. Renault had introduced the first turbocharged Formula One car in 1977. Various teething problems meant it wasn't until 1982 that several other teams had developed their own, and the enormous power gains made it the way forwards. Brabham, Renault, Ferrari and Toleman all ran with turbocharged engines in 1982. Brabham was the only FOCA-aligned team of the 4, but also used a naturally aspirated engine for the second and third rounds, and all other FOCA-aligned teams were still using the Cosworth DFV, which had been ubiquitous in Formula One since 1967. Also in 1982, FISA tried to impose new super license conditions, which would have tied drivers to a single team for up to 3 years. The Ferraris of Gilles Villeneuve and Didier Pironi, the McLaren of Niki Lauda, the Renault of René Arnoux, and the Alfa Romeos of Bruno Giacomelli and Andrea de Cesaris all refused to sign the new deal. So a meeting was held with Jean-Marie Balestre on the Wednesday before the opening round in South Africa, who said that no changes could be made to the deal without first going through the FIA Executive Committee, so if the drivers refused to sign it they would not be allowed to race. The following day, the GPDA hired a coach which all the drivers except Jochen Mass, who was staying with friends and didn't know about, and Jackie Ickx, who was only covering for Mark Surer, boarded, and instead of taking part in practice, they staged a sit-in at the Sunnyside Park Hotel in Kyalami. Teo Fabi eventually defected and explained everything the drivers had been discussing to Toleman boss Alex Hawkridge. Practice on Friday morning went ahead, with only Mass taking part. The other drivers eventually abandoned the strike, after ostensibly being told they would not be penalised for striking. The race went ahead, but all drivers were issued fines of between $5,000 and $10,000 and given a 2-race ban, and the new licence rules were scrapped. The drivers refused to pay the fines and abandoned the GPDA and replaced it with the Professional Racing Drivers Association, available to all racing drivers. The FIA Court of Appeal intervened, reduced the fines, changed the 2-race ban to a 1-race suspended ban, and the Grand Prix went ahead. In the Concord Agreement, a minimum weight of 585 kg was mandated for all cars. The naturally aspirated teams were at such a power disadvantage, however, that they found yet another loophole in the rules whereby the car's weight would be measured before and after the race, but any oils and cooling fluids could be refilled before the weigh-in, as the rule said nothing about said fluids needing to still be in the car at the end of the race. So the teams installed large water tanks in the side pods, which they would fill up before the weigh-in, claim it was used as brake coolant, and then dump the water on the track when they left the pit lane. Williams and Brabham both got found out at the second round in Brazil. Carlos Reutemann had won, and Keke Rosberg finished second, but they were both disqualified after Renault, who finished third, protested. Williams and Brabham both appealed this ruling, which took several weeks to be heard, and in the meantime the FISA-reliant Ferrari arrived at the next round in Long Beach with a car with 2 rear wings. Both wings were within the size regulations, but essentially worked as one unit that was double the permitted width, which they somewhat facetiously claimed was legal, as the rules did not specify that the car should have only 1 rear wing. FISA, however, did not agree, and they were also disqualified after Ken Tyrrell protested it. 3 weeks later at Imola, after Williams and Brabham's appeal was thrown out, all the FOCA-aligned teams opted to boycott the race, but Tyrrell, Azella and ATS all broke the boycott, meaning only 14 cars took part. However, unlike the 2 races which the FISA-aligned teams had boycotted, this one did still count towards the championship. Ken Tyrrell had been forced to break the boycott as he had run with sponsorless cars for the first 3 races and had just secured a 2-race deal with Ceramiche Imola to run Michele Alboreto, and Osella and ATS had lost faith in the largely British FOCA. After this, the hostilities abruptly stopped, and the full reasoning as to why is not really known. The naturally aspirated teams agreed to arrive at Zolder with appropriately ballasted cars, but the deaths of Gilles Villeneuve and Riccardo Paletti in consecutive races turned people's attentions elsewhere. Ground effect was banned in 1983, and almost all teams were now using turbo power. Tyrrell ended up being one of the last teams to do so, not acquiring customer Renault engines until late 1985, after retroactively getting disqualified from every race in 1984 after utilising a water tank that was filled with water filled with lead shot to help cool the cylinders and increase power, which would only be filled late in the race, meaning they ran most of it underweight. The first Concord Agreement was replaced by the second one in 1987. At the same time, Eccleston left Brabham and founded Formula 1 Promotions and Administration, or FOPA, which would later become Formula 1 Management, essentially putting an end to FOCA. With this, FOPA received 49% of TV revenues, 1% went to the teams, and the remaining 50% went to the FIA, with FOPA also paying out all prize money. The GPDA reformed in 1944 after the deaths of Roland Ratzenberger and Ayrton Senna and is still active to this day. Jean-Marie Balestre was made FIA president in 1986. He was beaten in an election as FISA president by Max Mosley in 1991, and 2 years later during the FIA presidential election decided to stand down and proposed that FISA merge with the FIA. Balestre died in 2008, and Mosley remained FIA president until 2009 and then committed suicide in 2021. Eccleston remained in charge of FOM until 2017, during which time the sport expanded into a major global franchise broadcast live all over the world before handing the keys over to Liberty Media, who have brought the sport into the social media age. 8 different Concord Agreements have been ratified since 1981, which the drivers now get a lot more say over. There have been smaller scale conflicts since, and threats to boycott races, though none have been carried out, as teams now receive very heavy financial penalties if they are capable of racing but refuse to do so. Accusations of bias towards certain teams or drivers are still thrown around regularly too, most frequently at Ferrari and Mercedes. Both Liberty Media and the FIA came under particular scrutiny during 2021 for what was seen as inconsistent application of the rules, designed to create an entertaining spectacle rather than fair racing, as well as their choices of race hosts in an age when the drivers and fans in particular are becoming increasingly concerned about the sport's stance on sustainability and human rights. As little as 3 races ago, drivers threatened to boycott a race over safety concerns, and with the all-seeing eye that is social media watching its every move, it's possible another conflict of this nature could erupt in the not-too-distant future. That's all for this video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Brook_F1, and I'll see you all next time.